You are sitting alone in a dark room. The only light source is the cold blue glow of a smartphone screen reflecting off your face. You are completely isolated, yet your thumb mindlessly pulls down on the glass, refreshing a feed, waiting for a notification. Hold that exact feeling of anticipation in your mind. Why does the absence of that digital ping feel like a creeping existential threat? We have been conditioned by history, by literature, and by the collective trauma of the 20th century to fear the watchful eye of the state. For decades, the cultural imagination has been haunted by the specter of Big Brother, a monolithic authoritarian force that monitors our every move against our will. We are told that surveillance is a violation. It is an intrusion. It is a heavy boot pressing down on the neck of human liberty. Therefore, we are taught to guard our privacy, to draw the blinds, to speak in hushed tones when the walls might be listening. The fundamental assumption of the modern era was that to be watched was to be oppressed. Freedom, consequently, was synonymous with the ability to hide. But if we strip away the inherited paranoia of dystopian fiction and look at the literal reality of our daily lives, a profound and unsettling contradiction emerges. In the contemporary era, we do not feel anxiety when we are being watched. We feel a suffocating panic when we go unnoticed. In that dark room, illuminated only by your screen, you are not hiding from the world. You are desperately trying to connect to its central nervous system. You are offering up your exact geographic location, your consumer preferences, your private thoughts, your political leanings, and your intimate desires to a vast, invisible network of corporate and state databases. You were not coerced into this submission. No armed guard stood over you with a baton. No state mandate required your participation. You volunteered. You typed out your confessions, formatted them for public consumption, and sent them into the void, hoping that the machine would acknowledge your existence. This is the great paradox of our time. Surveillance has undergone a radical, almost imperceptible transmutation. It has shifted from a mechanism of external discipline into a mechanism of internal desire. We have moved from a society that instinctively hides from the gaze of power to a society that actively, desperately performs for it. We curate our digital identities with the precision of public relations executives. We broadcast our movements, we quantify our biological functions, and we package our lives into digestible metrics. All of this is done in the relentless pursuit of being seen. We have traded the fear of the guard for a deep, insatiable hunger for the gaze. To understand how we arrived at this point, how the architecture of oppression became the architecture of validation, we must trace the lineage of the watchful eye. We must look back to a forgotten blueprint from 1791, a design that predicted your exact behavior tonight. We must examine the psychological mechanisms that transformed visibility from a punishment to be avoided into a validation to be craved. But more importantly, we must confront the terrifying reality of what happens when the machine decides to look away. To comprehend the magnitude of this psychological shift, we must first understand the architecture of discipline that defined the modern era. In 1791, the English philosopher and social theorist Jeremy Bentham proposed a revolutionary design for a prison. He called it the Panopticon, a word derived from the Greek roots pan, meaning all, and opticon, meaning of or foresight. The physical structure was brilliantly, ruthlessly simple. It consisted of a circular building with a central observation tower. Around the perimeter were individual cells, each spanning the width of the building, with a window on the outside to let in the light and a window on the inside facing the tower. The cells were heavily backlit. Therefore, the occupants were always illuminated, always visible, reduced to mere silhouettes against the light. But the true genius of Bentham's design lay in the central tower. It was constructed with Venetian blinds and complex wooden partitions so that the prisoners could never see inside. The fundamental mechanism of power here relied on two strict principles. Power must be visible, and it must be unverifiable. The prisoner can always see the tower, the visible, looming manifestation of authority. But they can never verify if a guard is actually standing inside it, looking at them at any given moment. Because the prisoner never knows exactly when they are being watched, they must assume they are being watched at all times. Consequently, they must regulate their own behavior. The physical presence of the guard becomes entirely unnecessary. The architecture itself does the work of subjugation. In 1975, the French philosopher Michel Foucault resurrected Bentham's forgotten architectural blueprint in his seminal work, Discipline and Punish, the birth of the prison. Foucault did not merely see the Panopticon as a building. He saw it as a diagram of a mechanism of power reduced to its ideal form. It was the ultimate metaphor for how modern society operates. To illustrate this profound shift, Foucault opens his book with a jarring, visceral contrast. He describes in excruciating historical detail the 1757 public execution of Robert-François Damien, a man who attempted to assassinate King Louis XV. Damien was subjected to a horrific display of sovereign power. His flesh was torn with red-hot pincers. His wounds were filled with molten lead, boiling oil, and burning resin. Ultimately, his body was dismembered by 4 horses in the public square. This was how power used to operate. It was a spectacular, violent, physical assertion of the sovereign's right to destroy the body. But Foucault argues that as society modernized, power underwent a fundamental transformation. It moved away from the spectacular punishment of the physical body and directed its focus toward the training and disciplining of the soul. The Panopticon represents this shift perfectly. It is a machine for creating what Foucault called docile bodies. Through the constant, unverifiable threat of observation, the subject internalizes the gaze of the authority. The prisoner, in Foucault's words, inscribes in himself the power relation. He becomes the principle of his own subjection. He becomes his own guard. This is what Foucault termed normalizing power. It is a power that does not need to strike you down in the public square. It simply needs to watch you until you conform to a specific regime of truth. This power, Foucault argued, is capillary. It does not just flow from the top down. It reaches deep into the microscopic spaces of everyday life, shaping our very identities. It migrated from the margins of the prison and the asylum into the center of society, infiltrating schools, factories, military barracks, and hospitals. Academic debates continue to refine this model. Scholars like Bruno Latour and those working within actor network theory have challenged the totalizing, omnipotent view of the Panopticon. They propose instead the concept of the oligopticon, sturdy but narrow views that assemble power without assuming absolute godlike omniscience. Power, they argue, is pieced together through specific limited networks rather than a single all-seeing eye. But Foucault's central thesis remains the bedrock of surveillance theory. The most efficient form of control is achieved not through physical chains, but by convincing the subject to police themselves. Yet, as perfect as the Panopticon was for the industrial age, it harbored a fatal limitation. It was made of stone. It required physical confinement. What happens to human behavior when power no longer needs walls? The Panopticon, for all its psychological brilliance, was fundamentally a solid structure. It was bound by the laws of physics, geography, and spatial confinement. To be subjected to its disciplinary power, you had to be physically placed inside the cell. You had to be trapped within the perimeter of the walls, held in place by iron bars and heavy doors. But the digital age has shattered those walls, ushering in an era of what sociologists Zygmunt Bauman and David Lyon have termed liquid surveillance. Adapting Bauman's broader theory of liquid modernity, liquid surveillance describes a system of monitoring that is no longer rigid, centralized, or tied to a specific physical location. It is decentralized, networked, and infinitely mobile. It does not wait for you to enter a prison, a factory, or a school. It follows you into the street, into your home, and into your bed. It seeps into the porous boundaries of everyday life like water, filling the spaces between our interactions, our purchases, and our private thoughts. This transition from solid to liquid surveillance brings with it a radical shift in the mechanism of compliance. In the carceral state of the solid Panopticon, surveillance is inherently coercive. You are forced into the cell. You are forced to endure the gaze. But in the liquid environment of the modern consumer society, surveillance operates through a completely different logic. It operates through the logic of seduction. You are not forced to participate. You are enticed. Consumer surveillance offers personalized marketing, seamless convenience, and the intoxicating promise of social validation. As Bauman astutely notes, in this liquid reality, individuals are quite literally seduced into watching, and, more importantly, seduced into being watched. We have entered the era of what media theorist Mark Poster called the Superpanopticon. In this decentralized, database-driven reality, we are no longer merely physical bodies moving through physical space. We are transformed into data subjects, digital avatars constructed involuntarily from the exhaust of our everyday electronic transactions. Every credit card swipe, every search query, every GPS coordinate logged by our devices builds a shadow version of ourselves. This highly legible data subject can be analyzed, predicted, and monetized with a precision that Jeremy Bentham could never have imagined. What makes liquid surveillance so insidious is that it relies on our active, enthusiastic self-commodification. We have become both the products and the marketers of ourselves. We willingly curate our digital identities, optimizing our profiles for maximum visibility, seeking social and economic gain through exposure. The traditional, coercive Panopticon still exists, of course, but it is increasingly reserved for the marginalized. Prisons, border checkpoints, and welfare systems operate as a Panopticon designed to exclude, manage, and control the unwanted. Meanwhile, the privileged classes eagerly engage in DIY surveillance. We purchase smart speakers, wearable fitness trackers, and biometric locks. We literally pay for the privilege of installing the watchful eye inside our own homes. The philosopher Gilles Deleuze, in his prescient essay Postscript on the Societies of Control, captured this transition perfectly. He wrote that a man is no longer a man confined, but a man in debt. We are no longer confined by the architectural walls of Bentham's prison. Instead, we are entangled in a liquid web of data, indebted to the platforms that host our digital existence, constantly paying the interest on that debt with our personal information. The automation of subjection is complete. This is not because we are trapped, but because we have been convinced that the trap is a stage, and the observer is our audience. But who exactly is sitting in the audience? While Foucault's framework of the Panopticon perfectly described the dynamic of the few watching the many, it missed a parallel system of control that was developing simultaneously. This was a system that would eventually define the cultural landscape of the 20th and 21st centuries. In 1997, the Norwegian sociologist Thomas Mathisen identified this massive blind spot. He introduced the concept of the Panopticon, a societal structure where the mechanism is entirely inverted. Instead of the few watching the many watch the few. Mathisen traced the historical origins of the Panopticon back to the creation of the mass press between 1750 and 1830. He followed its evolution through the successive waves of film, radio, and television. If the Panopticon isolates individuals in their separate cells to break their solidarity and enforce discipline, the Panopticon unifies the masses by directing their collective gaze toward a centralized spectacle. We sit in our living rooms, millions of us at once, watching the same screens, observing the same celebrities, reality television stars, politicians, and influencers. But this is not merely entertainment. It is a profound mechanism of social control. Unlike the Panopticon, which enforces compliance through the fear of the guard's gaze, the Panopticon enforces normalization through admiration and emulation. We watch the model humans on our screens. Therefore, we voluntarily adjust our own behaviors, our aesthetics, our consumption habits, and our desires to match theirs. We operate within what the philosopher Jean Baudrillard termed simulacra, a world of copies and representations that dictate our reality. We do not need a guard to tell us how to act. We simply watch the spectacle and discipline ourselves to fit within its parameters. However, the architecture of visibility did not stop evolving with television. With the advent of Web 2.0 and the explosion of interactive social media, the Panopticon mutated once again. The legal scholar Jeffrey Rosen conceptualized this new phase as the Omnipticon, a state where it is no longer just the few watching the many, or the many watching the few. It is everyone watching everyone simultaneously. In the Omnipticon, the barrier between the audience and the spectacle dissolves entirely. Users engage in what sociologists call mass self-communication. We are all broadcasters, and we are all the audience. We monitor our peers, our neighbors, our colleagues, and our rivals, just as closely as we monitor celebrities. In Chinese digital culture, there is a specific term for this deliberate, systematic monitoring of others, lives on social media. Shijian, which translates roughly to peeping or gazing. It is a recognized social practice, a way of gathering intelligence and establishing social hierarchies through the digital observation of peers. Some critics, like Aaron Doyle, have argued that Matheson's original Panopticon was too heavily tied to the top-down broadcast model of television. They suggest it neglected the viral mechanics, the horizontal peer-to-peer surveillance, and the potential for resistance inherent in the Internet age. But the core truth remains undeniable. The Panopticon has weaponized our social instincts. We police each other through likes, comments, retweets, and public shaming. We have crowdsourced the role of the prison guard. The guard hasn't left the tower. He simply handed us his binoculars. We are now complicit in the maintenance of the surveillance state, eagerly watching our fellow inmates, ensuring that no one steps out of line. We desperately hope that when the gaze turns toward us, we are deemed worthy of its attention. But this horizontal gaze is merely a psychological smokescreen for a much darker mathematical reality operating beneath the surface, a system that is quietly deciding your exact worth. What is the ultimate purpose of this relentless, liquid, omnidirectional observation? We often frame the debate around surveillance as a matter of individual privacy. We treat it as a question of what the state or the corporation knows about our personal secrets. But this is a fundamentally inadequate way to understand the digital panopticon. Surveillance is not merely about knowing, it is about categorizing. It is about power, economics, and the brutal mathematics of human worth. In 1993, the scholar Oscar Gandy introduced a concept he called the panoptic sort. Gandy defined this as a complex political economy of personal information. It is a system where individuals are continually identified, classified, and assessed based on their digital footprints. This computational sorting relies on the extraction of massive amounts of what Gandy termed transaction-generated information, or TGI. Every time you use a loyalty card at a grocery store, swipe a transit pass, click a targeted ad, or pause for 3 seconds on a video, you generate TGI. This data is harvested, aggregated, and fed into algorithmic models designed to determine your value to the market and your risk to the institution. The sociologist David Lyon expanded on this framework, arguing forcefully that surveillance is not just a privacy issue. It is a matter of profound social justice. Surveillance acts as a mechanism for social sorting. It categorizes populations, assigning varying degrees of worth, credibility, or risk to different groups and individuals. These algorithmic assignments are not abstract. They dictate your actual life chances. They determine whether you are approved for a mortgage, what interest rate you are offered, whether your resume is flagged for a human recruiter, and even how long you wait on hold for customer service. This system of database marketing and algorithmic management produces highly discriminatory practices. As Lyon notes, the system is designed to cream off some and cut off others. It creams off the profitable, the compliant, and the wealthy. It offers them VIP treatment, seamless travel through security checkpoints, and hyper-personalized conveniences. Simultaneously, it cuts off the marginalized, pressing people into rigid digital boxes and punishing the poor through automated systems of denial. If you live in a specific zip code, or if your purchasing habits align with a lower socioeconomic bracket, the algorithm flags you as a risk. Consequently, you are subjected to higher insurance premiums, predatory advertising, and increased scrutiny. Digital discrimination operates silently, beneath the surface of the interface, enforcing class divides with mathematical precision. Furthermore, feminist scholars have pointed out that this surveillance infrastructure inherently reproduces and amplifies patriarchal norms. Female and queer bodies are constantly categorized, analyzed, and policed in both public spaces and domestic spheres. From the algorithmic moderation of images on social media platforms that disproportionately censor female bodies, to the tracking of reproductive health data through period tracking apps, the digital gaze forces marginalized groups to constantly justify their presence. It demands that they conform to rigid, pre-programmed definitions of normalcy. Therefore, it often precludes their access to spaces of digital and physical pleasure. We are subjected to a continuous, invisible audit. The panoptic sort does not care about your inner life, your intentions, or your humanity. It only cares about your statistical correlation to historical data sets. It is a machine that looks at the messy, unpredictable reality of human existence and ruthlessly sorts it into columns of profit and loss, risk and reward. Because this sorting happens in the proprietary black boxes of corporate servers, we are denied the right to face our accuser. We are judged, categorized, and sorted by an architecture we cannot see, based on rules we are not allowed to understand. But how exactly does this machine extract the data it needs to judge you? At the very center of this vast architecture of social sorting sits a single glowing object. It is an object you likely have within arm's reach at this very moment. The smartphone. We are accustomed to thinking of the smartphone as a tool. We view it as a neutral piece of technology that we use to navigate the world, communicate with loved ones, and access information. But to view it merely as a tool is to fundamentally misunderstand its function in the modern surveillance apparatus. The smartphone is not a tool. It is a social prosthesis. More importantly, it is a ritual object of voluntary confession. The concept of the automated confession is not entirely new. In 1993, the artist and theorist Greg Garvey created an interactive installation called the Automatic Confession Machine. It presciently explored how humans might willingly interface with a digital terminal to absolve themselves of their sins. Today, that machine rests in the pockets of billions of people. The smartphone functions as a continuous, ambient confession machine. It extracts our truths, our physical locations, our biometric data, our late-night anxieties typed into search bars, while simultaneously constructing us as legible digital subjects. Consider a recent, highly revealing case study. In December 2024, researchers utilizing an Anthropic AI model conducted a pilot study involving 250 adaptive AI-led interviews. The system was designed to engage users in 10 to 15-minute conversations, dynamically adapting its questions to their responses. The AI successfully extracted deeply personal, lived experiences from the participants. It quantified their human struggles into neat, actionable statistics. It reported, for example, that 69% of participants felt a specific social stigma. It also noted that the automated system achieved an 86% time savings in data collection compared to human interviewers. The users willingly poured their truths into the machine, allowing their complex human experiences to be flattened into training data for future models. This interaction exemplifies what scholars call the circular confessional. When we interact with our devices, we are not just speaking into a void, we are engaging in a feedback loop. We monitor ourselves, we anticipate how the algorithm will interpret our data, and we self-edit our confessions for strategic optimization. We curate our photos, we carefully select our words, and we modulate our behavior to ensure that the machine understands us favorably. The device demands constant interaction, transforming our physical voices, our heartbeats, and our movements into structured data. It turns even our resistance, our attempts to use privacy settings or encrypted apps, into just another data point to be optimized. The smartphone is a ritualistic tool for lifelong confession. It requires our daily devotion. We wake up and touch it, we carry it against our bodies, we gaze into it before we sleep. Its pervasive nature has become so deeply embedded in our psychological infrastructure that institutional attempts to restrict it often reveal our profound dependency. For instance, in Term 4 of 2023, public high schools in New South Wales, Australia, implemented a strict mobile phone ban. This was despite experts like Dr. Joanne Orlando arguing that research does not conclusively support the idea that bans lead to academic improvement. She noted that global PISA educational rankings have been falling since 2006, regardless of phone policies. The debate over banning the device misses the deeper philosophical point. The smartphone is not merely a distraction from the real world. It has become the primary interface through which the real world is validated. To confiscate the confession machine is to sever the individual from the network of visibility that defines their existence. We cling to these devices not just because they are entertaining, but because they are the tether that keeps us attached to the Panopticon. Without them, we are unable to confess, unable to be sorted, and ultimately unable to be seen. But what happens when the network decides you are no longer worth watching? This brings us to the most terrifying psychological achievement of the modern surveillance state, the total inversion of our desires. In the era of the solid Panopticon, to be invisible was to be free, to escape the gaze of the guard, to slip into the shadows, to live off the grid. These were the ultimate expressions of liberty. The unobserved life was the only life that truly belonged to you. But today, in the liquid architecture of digital capitalism, invisibility has been redefined. It is no longer freedom. It is social death. We are caught in a brutal philosophical paradox. In the modern world, recognition requires exposure. To exist socially, economically, and politically, you must be legible to the database. If you refuse to participate, if you refuse to carry the smartphone, if you delete your profiles and sever your digital transactions, you do not become free, you become a ghost. You cannot rent an apartment, you cannot apply for a job, you cannot participate in the public discourse, you cease to exist in the eyes of the systems that govern human survival. Therefore, users willingly, even desperately, submit to data extraction because the alternative is unbearable. We are driven by a profound desire for recognition, a need to be counted, ranked, and acknowledged by the machine. We obsess over metrics. Our follower counts, our credit scores, our engagement rates, our daily step counts. This logic of accumulation organizes our very perception of reality. It defines our objectives, our successes, and our failures through algorithmic visibility. If an event is not photographed, tracked, uploaded, and validated by the network, we begin to doubt whether it actually happened at all. The metric becomes the proof of being. This dynamic is the engine of what scholar Shoshana Zuboff calls surveillance capitalism. It is an economic system that monetizes everyday human experience. Hyperscale businesses like Google and Meta exploit the economics of digital marginal costs. They achieve massive scale at costs approaching zero, precisely because the raw material, our lives, is provided for free. As Google's chief economist Hal Varian noted as early as 2014, the primary use of computer-mediated transactions is data extraction and analysis. We are the unpaid laborers mining our own souls to feed the database. We do it gladly because the database is the only mirror that tells us we exist. The corporation, as philosophers have noted, operates like a spirit, a gas. It is an invisible, pervasive atmosphere that inhales our voluntary confessions and exhales subtle algorithmic controls. It modulates our behavior through our own willing participation. We are no longer men confined. We are men in debt. We are indebted to the platforms that allow us to be seen. We pay our rent in the currency of our privacy, terrified that if we stop paying, we will be evicted from reality itself. The terror of the modern age is not that Big Brother is watching. The terror is that Big Brother might look away, leaving us stranded in the unbearable silence of our own undocumented existence. But where exactly does all this extracted existence go? Do not make the mistake of thinking that because liquid surveillance feels invisible, it has no physical form. The cloud is not a vapor, it is a machine. The digital Panopticon requires an architecture just as imposing, just as brutalist, and just as physical as Bentham's stone prison. But this new architecture is designed not to hold bodies, but to hold the data subjects we have willingly surrendered. Consider the physical reality of the Internet. It relies on geographically concentrated data centers. These are massive industrial fortresses that create a new kind of panopticon effect, allowing central actors to glean critical knowledge from global information flows. The most striking example of this is the National Security Agency's Comprehensive National Cybersecurity Initiative Data Center in Bluffdale, Utah. It is often referred to by its codename Bumblehive, or the Mission Data Repository. This facility occupies 1.5 million square feet of the Utah desert. It is a monument to invisible power. Interestingly, only 100,000 square feet of this massive footprint is actually used to house the servers and the data. The rest of the sprawling complex is dedicated to technical support, cooling systems, and administration, housing fewer than 200 human staff. It is a ghost town of machinery, quietly humming with the aggregated confessions of billions of people. The socio-technical aesthetic of the Bluffdale facility is deeply symbolic of modern power. It is designed to be impenetrable. The data halls are hidden beneath 5-inch thick glass, wrapped in a copper screen, and sealed with an inner pane. This structure is not just designed to keep physical intruders out. It is engineered as a Faraday cage to prevent electromagnetic signals from escaping. The building is clad in mirrored glass, reflecting the desolate beauty of the surrounding desert landscape, effectively camouflaging its true purpose. It is a building that refuses to be looked at, even as it looks at everything. As Shoshana Zuboff argues, Bentham's physical panopticon is almost prosaic compared to this modern digital architecture. In the physical panopticon, the prisoner could exercise cunning. They could find the blind spots in the cell. Crucially, the physical prison had an exit. A sentence could be served. A prisoner could be released back into the unobserved world. But digital surveillance has no exit. The data collected in Bluffdale, the profiles built by surveillance capitalists, the algorithmic shadows we cast, they do not expire. We can no longer see the observer in the tower. The architecture of oppression has dispersed invisibly, installing itself in the microscopic in-betweens of our digital lives. It is in the copper wires beneath the ocean, the fiber optic cables buried under our streets, the silent servers in the desert, and the glass screens in our hands. The prison has expanded to the exact dimensions of the world, and its walls are made of mirrors. We began with a question about the strange comfort of being watched. We have seen how the architecture of power evolved from the brutal public executions of the sovereign to the stone cells of Foucault's Panopticon and straight into the liquid, inescapable network of the Omnipticon. We have traded the fear of the guard for the hunger for the gaze. We have accepted the smartphone as our confessional. We have embraced the algorithm as our judge, terrified that without its validation, we will suffer the social death of invisibility. This leaves us with a terrifying, unavoidable question. What kind of freedom remains when our very sense of self requires us to be constantly exposed? If our identities are only validated through the extraction of our data, are we living or are we merely generating information? The next time you pick up your device, the next time you feel the urge to broadcast a moment of your life to the invisible crowd, pause, reflect on your voluntary confession. Ask yourself, are you performing for the tower or are you simply being? The architecture of desire is built entirely on your participation. If you want to continue looking deeper into the mechanisms that shape our society and our souls, subscribe. The tower is always watching. It is time we start watching back.